Hi, James. Okay,
Helen, I'm glad you're here. Keep it real here.
I'll do my best.
Yeah, we can't have an all-guy panel as well. So John Willis has trained me extremely well that no all-male panels can happen. So we're even
I was thinking adding in the Europe flair here is what we need.
Exactly. Okay, so let's for those of you that are hanging on here, we're going to go through the survey. I'll give you a little background first, and then we'll show some of the survey results here, just to make sure everyone can see the slides up here. And I can't see I can't see my green room, so I'm hoping everything's okay there. I'll open Slack just to make sure. So let's walk through some of the survey results. So this year, 2,076 people took the survey. So we've run this survey 4 or 5 times now. Each time there's about 2,000 people that are participating. We asked people in the survey to self-identify their kind of DevOps maturity level. So 25% of the people said they have highly mature DevOps practices. 49% are, kind of on their journey somewhere toward highly mature, and 26% had immature or non-existent practices.
You want to talk about these as we go, or you?
I'm going to go through some of the background of who took the survey, and then we'll get to the results of who was in there. So cross industry participation, banking and financial services and technology were kind of the biggies in there. But we also saw telco, government, education, retail, etc.
So I can only see a little screen, I think, with the slides on it. Should I be able to see a bigger screen with the slides?
Have you clicked into that? Let me go see. I'm going to run.
Oh, no, I've got it. I think. Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, we'll make sure that everyone is seeing the big screen out there.
Hey, and Derek, can I add just a thought on that first slide? Like, how did you feel that the number of people that are either on their way to DevOps or already kind of established DevOps practices? Did you feel like that was a pretty good uptick from previous years, or is this kind of like just a continual trend?
It's a good question. Let me go through and just fix I think I wasn't focused on the slide. Let's see if we can fix that for folks. Hopefully that fixed it. So we're now keeping on that screen. So yeah, so interesting. Year over year, I think it stayed pretty constant. I think I think it might have been 26% if I go back to that slide. Yeah, so it was 25% highly mature practices this year. I think last year it was 26%. So we're still kind of in the same ballpark range. We didn't see a lot, going into the highly mature area. And I think the 49% may have been 50% last year when we ran it. So pretty consistent year over year on that. So Mark is just coming back in to join us. So 27% had a DevOps specific title. 20% were developers, 13% architects. Very few security people took the survey this year. So kind of when we look at the survey results, 3% IT or AppSec. You'll notice most of these are developer-centric roles within the organization. Most organizations, or 50%, had over 100 developers. So these are fairly sizable organizations that went through. And just a slide that everyone seems to share from the survey results, as I've seen various people present it, was that 48% of developers know security is important, but don't have time to spend on it. So let's get into some of the survey results here and kind of what we saw, and then we can start the kind of roundabout discussion. So we asked people, and this was a really interesting play on the survey results and the kind of mature, non-mature DevOps practices, is that where are you putting automated security in the development lifecycle? And the yellow bars show those that had no DevOps practice, and the purple bars show those that have mature DevOps practices. So at the far right there, you see that throughout the process, automated security is implemented 338% more in DevOps shops, which was, I think was, a very telling perspective of, is DevSecOps real? Are people implementing security throughout the lifecycle? Yes, and considerably more. And then I'll quickly show, so we also looked at 2017 versus 2018 in this to see, if you were a mature DevOps shop last year and you're a mature DevOps shop this year, have you increased the percentage of, or the presence of automated security throughout the life cycle? And you'll see we had bumps of, 7 to 10% in each of these categories, and throughout the life cycle by 15%. So just commentary from James, Helen, Mark on kind of what you see in these two slides. James, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think this is good. Like we're seeing, I was kind of asking that question at the beginning because I feel like there is more market adoption. There is more people that are thinking about this, and I like that we're asking the question throughout the different stages, because sometimes I think it's easy to sort of hone in on one phase, and especially like when DevOps first started, like everyone was kind of really eager to do configuration management. I think with security, similarly, like just kind of honing in on one phase of the pipeline, depending on where you sit. But I like that it's throughout the process, and I think we sometimes have this idea like security has always sort of thought thoroughly throughout the process. Like if I do it all, like then I can finally check that box. But I think we're saying like, are you implementing and instrumenting any pieces of this? And I'm excited by this and to see this kind of continue to trend upwards. I mean, 15% is a pretty good tick year over year, and to see just all in all, just generally everything kind of increasing. So to me, this sort of represents what we're seeing kind of out there in the world as is, but it's great to have some numbers behind that.
Yeah, Helen, are you seeing a similar uptick or feeling an overall uptick in the clients that you're working with, bringing more automated security into the life cycle kind of year over year?
I wouldn't describe it as an uptick. I think people are starting to get to it. It's been a lot slower. I think, as I said at the end of my talk, I'm always surprised how often we show somebody how many potential problems there are and how slowly how slow they are to react to it. Security always seems to be the last thing that gets put into the DevOps tool chain.
Yeah.
But I do remember this slide from last year, and I do remember really enjoying. I think we looked at a couple of years compared to each other before, and what I quite liked was you can see, and I know the final one is throughout the process, but you can kind of see the shifting left. You can see the bars getting bigger the further we go left over time, which I think is a good indicator of people realizing that the earlier they do this, the better.
Yeah.
The thing that I always think about when I see a chart like this is, how do people self-identify themselves as mature DevOps organizations? Does that change, and is that a relationship to the bar too? I think it would be hard to take an internal look and say we're a mature DevOps organization when most people don't have the sense that the DevOps is an entire process. It's not just a CI/CD pipeline.
Yeah, and I, somewhat telling. I think we're going to get to some of the survey results later that kind of give people's reflection on what DevSecOps means, how they've integrated, or how comfortable they are with their security posture. So kind of the next slide up in the survey results was this one that, we asked, not only did we ask, are you using automated security throughout the life cycle or at different stages, but what are you using? So web application firewalls, which we haven't heard a lot about today and yesterday. Container security, which we've heard a heck of a lot about through almost all the customer presentations we've had, talk about some level of container security. Open source governance, clearly with Sonatype and our automated open source governance solutions. No surprise, you're hearing a lot about that at the Nexus user conference today and yesterday. So James, going back to you, when we look at this, you spend a lot of time in the web application firewall community. Surprises or not so surprised at the survey results here?
It's Signal Sciences. This is where we kind of sit right at the web application firewall layer, putting kind of real-time metrics back in the hands of developers and operations folks, right? So we really try to sit in that, and so I was surprised by the kind of this number just for overall adoption, but it is one of the longer standing technologies kind of on the board here. Like it's been around for a long time. The funny thing about web application firewalls is they're generally the most hated technology inside of an organization, which we've come to learn and see kind of how people are dealing with that. But I believe Forrester 2 years ago said it was like 16 or 18%. It was a really low number of people were actually happy or satisfied with their web application firewall, right? And most people like just, and it was the lowest of all technology spectrum. And so I think that's really interesting. It is good to see that people haven't really abandoned the technology, and we're seeing people that are running like RASPs or next generation WAFs, or coming up with ways to kind of implement still in their stack in the cloud type manner. Or containers or whatever. So I think it's encouraging, but the irony isn't lost on me of kind of like how it's the most adopted yet most hated. So
yeah, the other thing I find interesting, if you go back and think, like, this isn't security people that are taking this survey. This is DevOps and developers, right? And like, what are, if you're not in security and you weren't the people buying these tools necessarily, right? Some DevOps shops or DevSecOps shops are the buying organization. They say, yeah, I know we have WAFs out there, but if you look at what I know we're using container security, we're using, open source governance, but it's the kind of non-DevOps shops, the purple bars that are like, all these technologies are probably being used, but the developers, you probably aren't touching them. They're like, I don't know, 8%, man. DAS, static, analysis. Maybe our security team's using that, right? But
like web application firewalls have kind of ridden the compliance bandwagon. So like they were sort of said, hey, you need to put those in to get compliance. But also SAST and DAST and even probably SCA, you could make a good argument for is part of like PCI compliance standards and other frameworks. So it's interesting that like. And maybe it's the coupling of like how a lot of people kind of did this, what I consider kind of an ill-conceived idea in kind of modern times, but taking their WAF and putting it on their CDN or their caching layer, and sort of said, well, I know we have that Akamai thing, and we click the add a WAF on their button, but likely they don't know anything about the kind of dynamic application security scanners that they're using, or static code analysis, or any of that kind of stuff. So I think, you're right. Like that could be it, right? If we didn't have a lot of security people filling this thing out, they may not know as much on the right-hand side, because those have kind of stuck inside of the engineering wheelhouse, where like web app firewalls kind of naturally cross that generally security and operations kind of Venn diagram there.
Just, Helen, any patterns that you see that are reflective or not reflective of what the answers were here?
Actually, I was having a slightly different thought, which was, I don't think we do this at the moment, or I don't think you do this as part of the survey, but I'd also be interested in understanding what application security services people are buying. So James just mentioned Akamai, which was the one that was predominantly going through my head, but how much people are buying Akamai type solutions or penetration tests or traditional, and James is much more the expert than me, but what other services people buy in the security space?
Yeah.
It's interesting too, Helen, because I'm glad that you're on the call. It seems to me that this type of question changes depending on what region of the world you're in. When we're talking about, James, you're shaking your head, so I think you've seen that too. Like if you go to Southeast Asia or you go to Europe or United States, it's going to be different because of the cultural perception. James?
Yeah, and I think just the also depending. I was just talking with some folks that kind of do a lot of things in the oil and gas industry, and they're just with all the regulations and other things like that. Their ability to, or their the way that they're adopting cloud has been considerably different than people that have kind of been greenfielded type stuff, or stuff that's been kind of built up in the last 10, 15 years. So whereas Helen, your point, right, is like we in the modern kind of building your IT apps, right, you're starting to just pull in a bunch of services. Well, most of those boxes or those lines on that chart could have been represented with like hardware or large expensive kind of like software licensing type deals in the past. And so now services are kind of upsetting each of those plays, or some of them, right?
Right, and things like data power, where does that fit into that sort of thing?
Yeah. So the fun thing about the community survey is we're not the only one that develops the questions. So James, Helen, and others all played into kind of what are the questions that we ask. So we like to keep a lot of the same questions year over year for that consistency, but also building in as we think about what else do we need to build into the survey to kind of reflect the results. So let me jump to.
And I do like how every year we kind of think of like, oh, here's some new things that kind of sparked us. Like, we would really like to know the answer to that question. So
yeah. Hassan Yassar from CMU also threw in a number of really good questions this year as well. So outnumbered 100 to 1. I mean, this has been pretty consistent. I think I saw James at LastCon, maybe 4 years ago, present this ratio. And I don't think it's changing. And for me, it kind of points to the need for automation, because if you're always outnumbered, the only way to keep up is through automated security practices that enable you to keep pace. But I'm going to, before we all comment, I'm going to move to this slide, which was an interesting result: rate your cybersecurity preparedness. And this kind of gets back to Mark's comment about like, how do people perceive themselves as mature DevOps organizations or not? But when we ask people, the mature DevOps practices are yellow, the no DevOps practice is the orangish color, red color. So mature DevOps practices felt twice as prepared as the non-DevOps practices. Helen, I know you might be seeing this for the first time, today, certainly. But why do you think we saw this dynamic play out in the survey of, I feel better prepared if I have a mature DevOps practice? Where do you think that stems from?
So in my presentation, I talked about this word DevSecOps and where it's kind of come from and why it's important, and the fact that it does feel in the DevOps world that actually security was a bit of the last thought, the kind of last thing that came into town, if you like. And I kind of alluded to it earlier when we talked about when people are actually committing to do this stuff, and I said that security seems to be, when people are doing a CI or CD pipeline, security is the last bit that comes in. Mm-hmm. So a mature DevOps practice will hopefully have got to that point where they are having conversations about how to automate security. They'll have been doing things like looking at that DevOps handbook excerpt that I showed in my presentation, that talks about having pre-blessed security libraries and having automated security scanning tools in your deployment pipeline. So those guys will be having those conversations and hopefully understand what DevSecOps is and helping break that security constraint that you were just talking about. So one of our customers has very effectively done that. They're a relatively small customer. They've got a few hundred people, a couple of hundred people in IT. They've been experimenting with Agile for about 18 months probably now, and they're up to about 3 or 4 Agile teams, and they got one of their 3 or 4 security people to liaise basically with one of the Agile teams. So he spent a lot of time sitting with them, and the cross-pollination that they acknowledge that they've achieved means that that guy is now going off to another Agile team. They feel that they've brought the dev and test people up so far in that team the time they've spent together. So that, I think, is why people are feeling more prepared if they are doing more DevOpsy type things.
Mm-hmm. Mark or James?
I'm always like the detractor on this kind of stuff, because I wonder if that large yellow might not be self-deception. And I say that in all seriousness. It's like, okay, we're cool, we're doing DevOps now, and there's this perception that they're more secure that doesn't necessarily make them more secure. The other side of that coin too is conscious incompetency. A really good DevOps shop is going to be conscious of where they're incompetent. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's where the yellow's coming from.
Okay. All right, Mark, I'm an optimist, so I'm gonna come at you here. Listen, what do people think about DevOps, right? People think DevOps is automation, right? And instrumentation, feedback loops. I think those are 3 things that sort of resonate no matter whether you kind of buy into the lean background or CI/CD or whatever. But those are some common themes. So if we just take those 3, and then when you think about what do people think about when they mean cybersecurity preparedness, so a lot of that is just their ability to respond. And so if they can trust in the automation and they're able to move faster and be more agile, not in the agile development sense, but agile in just like the ability of quick response sense, or they're able to they're able to have more instrumentation, so they have more visibility inside their stack where they never had before. They know what libraries of things they've actually baked into their code, which before they couldn't have answered that with prayer, right? Or they could say, what part of their sites are under attack, in the production runtime. It's not perfect, but better. And then just the ability to know that like we know how to make code changes to our site like much more rapidly than we've ever done before. And like we don't have these monthly or quarterly or whatever releases. Like we're releasing all the time, so like we can respond properly whenever we do have any sort of incident. So I think like it's a continual growing of this. And Derek, I liked your kind of tie-in with the previous slide, because we don't have enough of those security people. Like we can't fill more people down there. Like the industry is at capacity. The only way we're going to fix this problem is the same way operations fixed this problem whenever they kind of came out with DevOps, is like moving developers down to the operation level and kind of working together to kind of fix this stuff together. We're already doing it, and people are already kind of coming up with this of taking developers and moving them into the security practices to add those instrumentation, feedback loops, and automation. So I think it's good. I'm an optimist.
I'm kind of upset that you're implying that I'm a pessimist.
Well, see, that's the trick. That's the trick.
It's the southern way you went about it.
You came through the back door on that.
No, and just to make a good panel and build on your controversy here, I'm going to side with James as well. That I remember
showing the light side.
Back to we were at a DevSecOps meetup at Fannie Mae, and their head of application development said, when the struts vulnerability was first announced back in March of last year, one of the big ones in March last year, he said, we knew we needed to get an updated version of that struts library into production. And it wasn't like, here's an emergency process that we need to run through. He said, from ideation into production is a 2-day process for us, because everything is a 2-day process for us. So when we had this new business requirement to move a new version of struts into production, we took 2 days to do this. Like they just ran it through their standard process, and this kind of like rate your preparedness. And kind of as James said, like, deploying a new update to software is something that in a DevOps pipeline you do all the time. So, in essence, there should be, in many ways, no difference to roll out a new version of a library or component or what have you. Now, struts isn't always that easy. Everyone will argue, but just to hear, his perspective on, I didn't have a security issue. I just had a business requirement, and here's how we roll it out. And this was our standard practice. That it was that kind of that comfort level that he was communicating. So we are at 3 o'clock, and James is on with us to present.
We can just keep doing this. I kind of like going at this panel here. So
yeah, so we filled a good half hour. Helen, I can't thank you enough for
Really,
staying on late for us in Europe, and we do appreciate that. I know you're in the Slack channel as well, so if there are questions brewing there, I did put the link into DevSecOpsDays.com so that people can find the London registration page. So hopefully we can get a few viewers registered for that. And I know Mark will be over there with you for that one.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.